Hey there. Tonight we are stepping into a different kind of story. Not one with kings or castles, not one built on swords or treaties, or the rise and fall of empires. Tonight's story belongs to the sea, and to the sky above it, and to the long, quiet space where both of them seem to swallow things whole and give nothing back. Tonight we are going to spend some time with one of the most enduring, most debated, most quietly haunting mysteries in the modern world. We are going to let ourselves drift slowly into the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. And if these calm, unhurried journeys through history and mystery help your mind ease into rest, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are on a quiet little mission here at Heo, boring history for sleep, and our goal right now is to reach 1,000 subscribers. It means more than you might imagine. If you have a comment to leave, we'd love to hear where you are listening from tonight, what time it is on your clock, and if you have any sleepy hype left in you at all, please send it our way. Every single one of you drifting off to the same slow voice, the same still stories. It is oddly comforting to know you are out there. Now, let's begin. Somewhere in the western North Atlantic Ocean, in a broad stretch of warm blue water, roughly between the tip of Florida, the island of Bermuda, and the archipelago of Puerto Rico, there exists a place that does not appear on any official map. It has no marked boundaries, no country claims it, no government administers it. And yet, for the better part of a century, this particular triangle of ocean has captured the imagination of the entire world in a way that few geographical locations have ever managed. Ships have vanished inside it, planes have disappeared over it, people have stepped into its invisible edges and simply ceased to be. No wreckage, no bodies, no final transmissions that made any logical sense. Or so the legend goes. The Bermuda Triangle, also known with a certain dramatic flair as the Devil's Triangle, covers an area estimated somewhere between 500,000 and 1.5 million square miles of open ocean, depending on who is drawing the imaginary lines. It is a place defined entirely by stories told about it, and those stories, accumulated over decades and decades, have layered themselves one upon another like sediment on the ocean floor, pressing down into something dense and dark and deeply compelling. There is something about this particular stretch of water that refuses to let the human mind go. Something about the combination of warm tropical sea, unpredictable weather, strange magnetic behavior, and the sheer scale of the losses said to have occurred within its invisible borders that keeps people coming back, asking the same questions over and over. What is really happening out there? Tonight, we are going to explore that question together, slowly, carefully, without rushing to conclusions in either direction. We are going to look at the geography of the place itself, the actual physical ocean and what it is made of, what lives in it and beneath it, what moves through it. We are going to walk through the most famous disappearances one by one, giving each one the time and attention and quiet contemplation it deserves. We are going to hear the last known words of pilots and sailors who passed into this stretch of ocean and never came back out. And then, with the same unhurried patience, we are going to sit with the scientists and the skeptics and the researchers who have spent years trying to make sense of it all.
Because the truth about the Bermuda Triangle is not simple. It never has been. It exists somewhere in the long, uncertain space between the verifiable and the inexplicable, between human error and something that might be a little harder to explain away. And it is in that space, that gentle, uncertain, wondering space, that we are going to spend tonight. So settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Close your eyes if you like. The ocean is very still tonight, and there is nothing to be afraid of here. We are just listening to old stories. We are just drifting slowly through a mystery that has been puzzling people for generations. And somewhere in the telling of it, perhaps you will find the particular kind of rest that only comes when the mind is quietly occupied with something interesting and far, far away.
The water is warm. The sky above is a wide, deep dark. And somewhere out there, between three imaginary points drawn on a map that does not exist, something has been happening for a very long time. Let's find out what. Section 2. Drawing the triangle. Geography, borders, and the sea itself. Before we can begin to understand the mystery, we need to understand the place. And the place, it turns out, is far more interesting than most people give it credit for. Picture the Atlantic Ocean, the Western Atlantic specifically, where the water begins to warm as it moves away from the deep cold of the open sea and presses southward toward the Caribbean. On a map, if you were to place one point at Miami, Florida, that bright, humming city on the southeastern tip of the American coast, and draw a line northeast to the island of Bermuda, and then draw another line southeast to Puerto Rico, and then connect those last 2 points back to Miami, you would have the rough shape of the triangle we are talking about. A triangle of open water, a triangle of sky and depth and current and wind. But even describing it that way implies a certainty of boundaries that does not really exist. Some researchers draw the triangle wider, some draw it narrower. Some include the Sargasso Sea in its interior. Some stretch one point to include the Azores. The triangle, strictly speaking, has no official outline. It is a concept as much as it is a place, an agreement of sorts that a particular region of the Atlantic seems to be associated with a disproportionate number of strange events. Whether or not that association holds up under scrutiny is something we will examine later. But the geography itself, the real physical character of this stretch of ocean, is worth knowing well, because in many ways the geography is the beginning of every explanation. The sea here is not uniform. It is not a flat, predictable body of water that simply goes from shallow to deep in a gentle slope. The Bermuda Triangle region is defined by extraordinary variation in its underwater terrain. Directly east of the Florida coast, the ocean floor drops off sharply into what is known as the Straits of Florida, a deep underwater canyon through which the Gulf Stream rushes with enormous force. The Gulf Stream is one of the most powerful ocean currents on Earth, a river of warm water flowing within the colder ocean, moving northward along the American coast at speeds that can reach up to 5.5 miles per hour at the surface. For a ship that has lost power, or for an aircraft that has gone down somewhere in the water,
This current is not simply a geographic feature. It is an eraser. The Gulf Stream can move debris, bodies, wreckage, any evidence of a disaster hundreds of miles from the site of the incident within days. What looks like a vanishing can sometimes simply be the work of that relentless, indifferent current.
Then there is the depth. The Bermuda Triangle sits above some of the deepest water in the Atlantic Ocean. The Puerto Rico Trench, which marks the boundary of the region's southeastern edge, descends to a depth of nearly 27,500 feet. That is more than 5 miles straight down. It is the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. When things go down in this part of the world, they can go down very far indeed. The ocean floor here is not a flat plain waiting to be searched. It is a complicated, jagged, enormous landscape of ridges and trenches and abyssal plains that human technology has only partially mapped. In some of these depths, a crashed aircraft or a sunken ship could lie for centuries without ever being found. The water temperature in the region varies significantly too. At the surface, especially in summer, the Atlantic here is warm and almost gentle, the kind of warm that makes the Caribbean famous for its beauty. But at depth, the temperature drops to near freezing, and the combination of warm surface water and cold deep water creates conditions that can produce extraordinarily violent weather with very little warning. Thunderstorms here can build from calm skies to severe tempests in less than an hour. Waterspouts, tornadoes over the ocean, are not rare in this part of the Atlantic. They can form quickly, move unpredictably, and cause catastrophic damage to any vessel unlucky enough to be in their path. And then they can dissipate just as quickly, leaving no trace of what they have done. The Sargasso Sea deserves its own mention. It is an unusual body of water that lies entirely within the Bermuda Triangle, bounded not by coastlines, but by 4 ocean currents: the Gulf Stream to the west, the North Atlantic Current to the north, the Canary Current to the east, and the North Atlantic Equatorial Current to the south. The Sargasso Sea is the only sea in the world defined this way, by currents rather than land. Its surface is blanketed with floating golden-brown seaweed called sargassum, which gives it its name, and its waters are unusually still and calm. It is a strange, closed-off, almost dreamlike place. Sailors have written about it for centuries, with a combination of fascination and unease. Christopher Columbus passed through it on his first voyage to the Americas in 1492 and noted the unfamiliar stillness of the water and the strange floating weed. In the 15th century, some sailors feared the Sargasso Sea was a place from which ships could not escape, a theory that was exaggerated but not entirely without basis. In light winds, the seaweed can slow a ship, and the stillness of the water can feel, in the wrong frame of mind, like something is holding you in place. Columbus noted other strange things too. His journal records compass anomalies in this region, moments when his magnetic compass failed to behave as expected. At the time, this was deeply alarming, not least because compasses were among the most critical navigation tools of the era. And a compass that behaved strangely implied something strange about the place you were in. We now understand that the Bermuda Triangle region is one of only a handful of places on Earth where magnetic north and geographic true north align closely, which can confuse navigators who are calibrating their instruments for the usual deviation between the two. This sounds like a minor technical detail, but for sailors and pilots navigating by compass alone, especially in an era before GPS, it could mean the difference between finding their destination and becoming lost. So before a single ship has gone down or a single plane has disappeared, the Bermuda Triangle already presents itself as a place with unusual and occasionally treacherous physical character. Deep water, powerful currents, violent weather that arrives without warning, unusual magnetic behavior, a sea bounded by nothing but moving water.
These are real, measurable, verifiable features of this place. They are not supernatural. They are not mysterious in the eerie, unexplainable sense. But they do form a backdrop against which tragedy becomes not just possible, but perhaps somewhat more likely than in other, more predictable stretches of ocean. And it is against that backdrop that the stories begin. Section 3. The Legend is Born. How the Myth Was Made. Mysteries rarely announce themselves. They accumulate gradually over years and decades, one unexplained event at a time, until someone finally stands back and notices the shape they have made together.
The Bermuda Triangle was no different. It did not spring into existence as a fully formed legend on any particular date. It grew. It built itself slowly, out of individual tragedies and half-understood events, and the very human tendency to look for patterns, to find connections, to make meaning out of chaos. And then, at a certain point in the mid-20th century, it stepped fully into the popular imagination and never quite stepped back out. The earliest suggestions of something unusual in this region of the Atlantic can be traced back to the middle of the 19th century. In 1840, a French merchant ship called the Rosalie was found drifting in the Sargasso Sea, apparently undamaged but entirely abandoned by its crew. No bodies were ever recovered. No explanation was ever offered. The ship's cargo was untouched. The sea around it was calm. The crew had simply gone. Stories like this circulated among sailors and port workers for years, passed from ship to ship, from one harbour to the next, acquiring small embellishments and emotional weight with each retelling. Then came a series of more documented, more officially recorded incidents in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Vessels went missing, ships were found abandoned, mariners reported strange experiences in this stretch of the Atlantic. But these events were not yet connected by any unifying framework. They were individual tragedies, filed in naval records and newspaper archives, mourned by families and then largely forgotten by the wider world. The first time anything resembling the modern legend of the Bermuda Triangle appeared in print was in September 1950, when a writer named Edward Van Winkle Jones published a short article in the Associated Press describing a pattern of ship and aircraft disappearances in the Western Atlantic. The article drew some attention, but it was modest in its reach. It planted a seed, but the seed did not yet have a name. That name came from a writer called Vincent Gaddis. In August of 1964, Gaddis published a cover story in a magazine called Argosy, a popular publication of the era, in which he described this mysterious stretch of ocean as the Bermuda Triangle. It was the first time the phrase had appeared in print. Gaddis laid out what he saw as a series of inexplicable disappearances within the triangle's boundaries, presented them as connected, and implied that something profoundly strange was at work. The article was widely read and widely discussed. The phrase caught on immediately. It had a certain music to it, the Bermuda Triangle. It was exactly the kind of name that the human imagination finds irresistible, specific enough to feel real, mysterious enough to feel important. Gaddis expanded his ideas into a book in 1965, and other writers took notice. But the legend did not truly explode into global consciousness until 1974, when a writer named Charles Berlitz published a book simply titled The Bermuda Triangle. Berlitz was a gifted popular writer, skilled at making complex or obscure topics accessible and compelling to a mass audience. His book sold millions of copies worldwide. It was translated into dozens of languages. It placed the Bermuda Triangle firmly at the center of the cultural conversation about unsolved mysteries, conspiracy theories, and the limits of human knowledge. Berlitz's book was sweeping, dramatic, and deeply entertaining. It was also, as subsequent researchers would discover, not always scrupulously accurate.
Berlitz drew together every disappearance, every strange incident, every unusual sighting he could find that was associated with the region, and he wove them into a narrative that strongly implied something beyond normal explanation was at work. He entertained theories ranging from unusual magnetic anomalies to underwater alien bases to the interference of the lost civilization of Atlantis. His writing had the quality of something both terrifying and oddly beautiful, the idea that somewhere out there, in a stretch of perfectly ordinary-looking ocean, the ordinary rules of the physical world might not apply.
A year later, in 1975, a researcher and pilot named Lawrence David Cush published a book of his own, with the rather blunt title, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved. Cush had done something that Berlitz apparently had not done with any particular rigor. He had gone back to the original sources. He had read the actual naval records, the actual weather reports, the actual insurance documents and newspaper archives and Coast Guard files that described each individual incident that Berlitz and Gaddis had cited. And what Cush found was not exactly reassuring for the legend. In case after case, Cush found that the stories had been exaggerated, distorted, or simply invented. Ships that Berlitz had described as vanishing in calm weather had actually gone down in violent storms. Disappearances that had been presented as occurring within the triangle had actually happened hundreds of miles outside its boundaries. Incidents were listed as mysterious when official investigations had already produced clear explanations. Some of the cases Berlitz cited were apparently fabricated entirely, with no historical record of them ever having occurred. Cush's conclusion was direct and somewhat deflating. The Bermuda Triangle mystery, he argued, was largely a manufactured one. And yet the legend did not die. If anything, it deepened, because even after Cush stripped away many of the most dramatic embellishments, a core of genuinely unexplained incidents remained. Real ships, real planes, real people, gone without adequate explanation. The edifice of manufactured mystery that Berlitz had built was significantly compromised by Cush's research, but the foundation beneath it, the actual factual disappearances, was still there, still unexplained, still quietly asking the same question. What happened to them? That question is where we are going now. Section 4, Flight 19, 5 planes and a vanishing. Of all the disappearances associated with the Bermuda Triangle, none has captured the imagination quite so completely, quite so persistently, as the one that occurred on the afternoon of December 5th, 1945. It was a Tuesday. The Second World War had ended only a few months earlier. The world was breathing a long, shaky exhale of relief, and the United States military was in the process of the enormous, complicated work of drawing down from a wartime footing. At Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers were being prepared for a routine training exercise. The Avenger was a well-built, dependable aircraft. It had served with distinction throughout the Pacific War. This was not an experimental flight, not a dangerous mission. It was a training run, a navigational exercise meant to take a group of relatively experienced student aviators over open water and back again, the kind of thing that was done dozens of times a week. The flight was designated Flight 19. It consisted of 5 aircraft carrying 14 men in total. Leading the mission was Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, a seasoned pilot with more than 2,500 hours of flight time. His students were not novices. They knew the aircraft. They knew the region.
They had done exercises like this before. The plan was straightforward. Take off from Fort Lauderdale, fly northeast to the Bahamas, complete a bombing practice run over Hens and Chicken Shoals, then fly north, then turn back southwest and return to base. A triangular route over familiar water. A clear winter afternoon. Nothing to suggest that anything other than a routine training exercise was about to unfold.
Flight 19 took off at approximately 2:10 in the afternoon. For the first hour or so, everything appeared to proceed normally. The aircraft flew their planned route northeast toward the Bahamas, completed their practice bombing run, and began the next leg of the journey. And then, somewhere over the Atlantic, something went wrong. The first indication that the flight was in trouble came at around 3:40 in the afternoon, when Lieutenant Robert Cox, who was flying a different aircraft in the area, picked up a transmission from Flight 19 on his radio. The voice he heard was anxious, troubled. He heard Lieutenant Taylor telling one of his students that they were lost, that their compasses were not working correctly, that Taylor himself was not sure where they were. Cox attempted to assist. He tried to get a fix on Flight 19's position. He offered guidance. But the radio communications between Flight 19 and the ground were fragmented, distorted, interrupted by static. What transmissions did get through painted an increasingly confused picture. Taylor apparently believed, based on the landmarks he was seeing, that he was over the Florida Keys, the chain of small islands southwest of Miami. He thought he was flying in the wrong direction and turned northeast to correct for what he perceived as an error. But the keys he thought he was seeing were almost certainly the Bahamas, and by turning northeast, he was flying his flight further out over the open Atlantic rather than toward the coast. It was a disorienting, frightening spiral of confusion unfolding in the air. By 5 in the evening, the light was fading. The weather, which had been reasonably calm at departure, was deteriorating. Winds were picking up, seas were growing rougher. And Flight 19 was somewhere over the Atlantic, low on fuel, with compasses that their pilot described as behaving strangely, unable to determine with confidence where they were or which way was home. The transmissions that came through in those final hours were fragments. Students asking for guidance, Taylor asking other pilots what they thought. A moment where another voice was briefly heard, suggesting that if they simply flew west, they would reach the coast. But Taylor apparently did not follow the suggestion. At approximately 5:50 in the evening, the last transmission from Flight 19 was received. After that, silence. A search operation was launched immediately. Within hours, ships and aircraft were combing the area where Flight 19 was believed to have gone down. And then the search itself suffered a loss. A PBM Mariner flying boat, a large patrol aircraft specifically designed for overwater search and rescue operations, was dispatched to assist. It carried a crew of 13 men. It took off into the darkening evening, radioed a routine position report at 7:30 that night, and then vanished as completely as the aircraft it had been sent to find. There were reports from a merchant vessel in the area of a sudden explosion in the sky around that time. The Mariner was known to have a slight vulnerability to fuel vapor ignition, but this too has never been confirmed. In a single day, 6 aircraft and 27 men had disappeared. The subsequent investigation by the Navy lasted weeks. Search operations covered more than 250,000 square miles of ocean. Not one confirmed piece of wreckage from any of the 5 Avengers was ever found. Not a life jacket, not a seat, not a fragment of fuselage. Nothing. The Navy's official findings were, in their own way, almost more unsettling than a dramatic explanation would have been. Their conclusion was that the disappearance of Flight 19 was due to causes or reasons unknown. It was one of the very few times in aviation history that a military investigation simply could not determine what had happened to a flight. The most rational reconstruction of what happened suggests that Lieutenant Taylor, an experienced but somewhat error-prone navigator who had previously gotten lost during training exercises in the Pacific, became disoriented over the Bahamas and convinced himself he was somewhere he was not. His insistence that they were over the Keys when they were likely over the Bahamas may have caused him to lead the flight in entirely the wrong direction. Low on fuel over open ocean in deteriorating weather at night, the 5 aircraft almost certainly went down in the water. The Avenger, while a capable aircraft, was not known for floating gracefully after a forced water landing, particularly in rough seas. The Gulf Stream in that area moves northward with significant force, and any wreckage would have been scattered and carried away within hours.
But the fact remains, no wreckage was ever definitively confirmed, and the radio transmissions, the fragments of confused, frightened voices from the sky, have lodged themselves permanently in the memory of everyone who has ever heard them described. The last confirmed words of Flight 19 paint a picture that is impossible to entirely rationalize away. 5 planes, 24 men, a clear departure from a military airfield, and then a slow, spiraling dissolution into the afternoon sky over the western Atlantic. Gone without a final explanation, gone without a physical trace. In the years since, Flight 19 has become the single most iconic event in the mythology of the Bermuda Triangle. It has been depicted in films, novels, television documentaries, and countless online articles. Every time someone mentions the triangle, Flight 19 is usually the first thing they describe. And perhaps that is appropriate, because Flight 19 is, in its particulars, a genuinely unsolved mystery. The most likely explanations are plausible. They are probably correct, but none of them have been proven. And on a December evening in 1945, 27 men flew into a stretch of Atlantic sky and did not come back. That is not nothing. That is not something a rational, curious mind can simply set aside. Section 5. The USS Cyclops, the ship that simply ceased to exist.
If Flight 19 is the most famous air disappearance in the history of the Bermuda Triangle, then the USS Cyclops is without question its maritime counterpart. And in some respects, the Cyclops is an even more unsettling story. Because the Cyclops was not a small plane with a handful of crew. It was one of the largest naval vessels of its era, carrying hundreds of people, crossing waters that ships traversed regularly. And it is gone, completely, irrevocably, with no distress call, no wreckage, no bodies, and no explanation that has ever satisfied anyone who has looked seriously at the case. The USS Cyclops was launched in 1910 and commissioned into the United States Navy as a collier, a ship designed to carry coal and heavy cargo to naval fleets operating far from home ports.
It was a colossus for its time, 542 feet long, capable of carrying enormous loads, built with the kind of heavy industrial confidence that characterized American naval engineering in the early 20th century. By 1918, when it vanished, the Cyclops had been converted from coal transport to general cargo duties, and it was on one such cargo mission that it disappeared.
In early March of 1918, the Cyclops was making its way north from Barbados in the Caribbean, heading for Baltimore, Maryland. It was carrying over 10,000 tons of manganese ore, a heavy, dense metal used in the production of steel. The ore was loaded in the holds, and the ship sat low in the water under the weight of it. On board were 309 people, crew and passengers, including a number of American officials and a Brazilian consul. The ship's commander was Lieutenant Commander George Worley, a character who reportedly had something of an eccentric reputation among those who knew him, though the details of his behavior have been colored over the years by the subsequent tragedy. The Cyclops departed Barbados on March 4, 1918. It sent a routine communication shortly thereafter, and then, as simply and completely as if someone had switched off a light, it ceased to exist. No distress call was ever sent. At the time, the Cyclops was fully equipped with wireless telegraph equipment, and there was every reason to believe it was in working order. If the ship had begun to founder in a storm, if it had been struck by some catastrophic mechanical failure, there would have been time, even a short time, to transmit a distress signal. None came. The waters between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay were extensively searched in the weeks following the ship's disappearance. Nothing was found. Not a life raft, not a piece of the hull, not a single item from the manifest of cargo or the belongings of 309 human beings. United States President Woodrow Wilson, when commenting on the disappearance of the Cyclops, said, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." It remains one of the most frequently quoted sentences about the Bermuda Triangle, and more than 100 years later, it is still essentially the most accurate summary of what is known. Over the decades, investigators and researchers have proposed various explanations. The ship was overloaded, some have argued. 10,000 tons of dense manganese ore sitting in a hold designed for lighter loads, combined with a ship that reportedly had one of its two engines out of service. An overloaded, underpowered vessel in potentially rough seas is not an absurd scenario for catastrophic structural failure. Others have noted that the manganese ore, being a heavy and somewhat unstable cargo, could have shifted in rough water, destabilizing the ship suddenly and causing it to capsize before anyone had time to react. A capsizing ship, especially a large one, can go down with remarkable speed when the weight is distributed wrongly. Still others have proposed darker theories. It was 1918 and the world was at war. German submarines were actively patrolling Atlantic waters and had sunk numerous ships in the months preceding the Cyclops' disappearance. It is not impossible that a German U-boat found and sank the Cyclops without leaving any survivors or witnesses. The German naval archives have been examined multiple times by researchers looking for any record of an attack on a ship matching the Cyclops, and no such record has ever been found. But the archives are not complete, and the chaos of wartime creates gaps in documentation that can never entirely filled.
What makes the Cyclops particularly compelling as a mystery is the completeness of its absence. Most maritime disasters leave something, a cloud of debris on the surface, a slick of oil, bodies, something. The Cyclops left nothing. In the decades following its disappearance, several other ships went down in the region, and their debris was eventually located, however scattered. The Cyclops seems to have left no trace at all. And in those waters, in those depths, where the ocean floor drops to thousands of feet in some places, and the Gulf Stream moves continuously northward, it is not impossible that debris was simply scattered beyond recovery before anyone could search effectively. But it is still an extraordinary absence, even accounting for all of that. Two of the Cyclops' sister ships, vessels built to the same design and serving similar functions, also disappeared in the same general region in 1941, adding a quietly chilling footnote to the story. The USS Proteus and the USS Nereid, both also Cyclops-class Navy colliers, vanished in November and December of 1941 respectively, while sailing along similar routes. The official explanation for these losses is that they were the victims of German submarine action during wartime, which is entirely plausible. But the fact that three ships of the same design disappeared in the same general area of the Atlantic is the kind of coincidence that the human mind finds it difficult to simply absorb without wondering. The USS Cyclops sits at the very center of the Bermuda Triangle legend, not because its disappearance is the most dramatic on record, but because it is the most complete, the most silent. 309 people, a 500-foot ship, an ocean that accepted them and said nothing in return.
There is a category of maritime mystery that is, in its own way, more unsettling than a simple disappearance. That is the ghost ship, a vessel found floating at sea, intact, seaworthy, with everything in its proper place, food on the table, clothes in the cabins, cargo undisturbed in the hold, and no one on board. No one alive, no one dead, just absence. The most famous ghost ship in history is the Mary Celeste, discovered adrift in the Atlantic in December of 1872. She was an American brigantine found by the crew of another ship, the Dei Gratia, between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. The Mary Celeste was under full sail, moving normally, with no sign of damage or struggle. The cargo, 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, was largely undisturbed. The crew's personal belongings were still in their quarters. Food was reportedly on the stove. The ship's log was present. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting the crew had departed voluntarily, but nothing else indicated why they would have done so. The captain, Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his daughter, and a crew of 7 were never found. Strictly speaking, the Mary Celeste disappeared south and east of the Bermuda Triangle region, and it is not always included in the Triangle's canon of mysteries, but its story belongs here in spirit, because it represents precisely the kind of inexplicable human vanishing that the Bermuda Triangle has come to symbolize. A ship that functions perfectly, maintains its course, carries its cargo, and carries no one.
The Triangle region itself has produced several ghost ship stories of its own. The Ellen Austin incident of 1881 is one of the most persistently retold. The Ellen Austin was a British merchant vessel sailing from Liverpool to New York when its crew sighted another ship drifting erratically in the waters of the Sargasso Sea. The drifting vessel appeared undamaged, but gave no response to hails or signals. A boarding party was sent over and found the ship in perfect order, but completely abandoned. No crew, no indication of what had happened. The Ellen Austin's captain placed some of his own men aboard the drifting vessel, with instructions to sail it to port. and for 2 days both ships traveled together. Then a squall separated them. When the weather cleared, the Ellen Austin's crew found the mystery ship again, but the men who had been placed aboard it had vanished. The same emptiness that had greeted the first boarding party greeted the second. There is reason to be cautious about the Ellen Austin story. Like many Bermuda Triangle accounts, its details have shifted and expanded with each retelling, and the original documentary evidence for the incident is thin. But the story persists because it captures something that people find viscerally troubling: the idea of a ship that swallows people and continues on, serene and empty.
In September of 1955, a pleasure yacht called the Connemara IV was found drifting and crewless in the Atlantic south of Bermuda. The yacht appeared to have weathered a storm. There was damage consistent with rough weather, but no bodies were found in the water nearby, and the 3 men who had been sailing it were never recovered. The official assumption is that the yacht was caught in a severe storm and the crew was swept overboard, which is entirely plausible. But the boat's continued floating, its continued presence on the ocean after whatever event had taken its crew, gives it a ghostly quality. The Witchcraft, a 23-foot cabin cruiser, disappeared on December 22, 1967, in what is perhaps one of the most puzzling incidents in the Triangle's more modern history. The owner, Dan Burak, called the Coast Guard from the boat at approximately 9 in the evening to report that he had struck something in the water, likely a reef, but that no one was injured and the boat appeared undamaged. He was close to Miami, barely a mile offshore. The Coast Guard responded within 19 minutes. When they arrived at the coordinates Burak had given, there was no boat, no debris, no flares, no life preservers, nothing at all on the surface of the water. The Witchcraft was equipped with flotation devices that should have kept it afloat indefinitely, even if it had taken on water, and yet it was gone. Disappeared within 19 minutes of a calm, routine communication, within sight of one of the most populated coastlines in America.
The SS Marine Sulphur Queen is another case that belongs in this discussion. Even though it was not technically a ghost ship, it simply disappeared. In February of 1963, the Marine Sulphur Queen, a converted tanker carrying molten sulfur in insulated tanks, vanished in the Florida Straits with 39 crew members aboard. It was the kind of vessel that the Coast Guard had already flagged as poorly maintained and structurally questionable. The conversion from oil tanker to sulfur carrier had not been done to a standard that inspired confidence, and the design of the ship, with its heavy, hot cargo contained in tanks that shared space with the machinery and living quarters, was considered inherently risky. The Coast Guard's eventual assessment was that the ship had likely suffered a catastrophic structural or cargo-related failure. Some debris was found: a life jacket, a name board, an oar, not much, and the 39 men who had been aboard were never accounted for. But the Marine Sulphur Queen case illustrates something important about the way the Bermuda Triangle legend has been assembled over the years. Here is a ship whose loss had a plausible, officially documented explanation: a poorly maintained vessel carrying dangerous cargo in a region with challenging weather. And yet it has been absorbed into the Triangle mythology as another unexplained disappearance. The machinery of the legend, once established, draws events into itself, whether or not they fit the profile of a genuine mystery. This is part of why researchers like Cushé found, when they went back to the original records, that many of the Triangle's purported mysteries dissolved under examination. Not all of them, but many.
Then there is the Carol A. Deering,
a 5-masted commercial schooner found run aground on the Diamond Shoals off Cape Hatteras in January of 1921, technically just outside the usually drawn boundaries of the triangle, but close enough to be associated with it in the popular literature. The Deering was found with full sails set, with food apparently being prepared in the galley, with the lifeboats gone, and with no trace of her 11-man crew. An investigation involving multiple U.S. government agencies, including the State Department, found no satisfactory explanation for what had happened to the crew. Theories ranged from mutiny to piracy to a freak wave sweeping the crew overboard, but none was ever confirmed. The Carroll A. Deering remains one of the most thoroughly investigated and least satisfactorily explained maritime mysteries of the 20th century. What the ghost ships share, ultimately, is the quality of pointedness. A ship that sinks, even without explanation, at least makes a kind of physical sense. Something went wrong, the sea won, the evidence sank with the vessel. But a ship that continues, that maintains its course, that preserves its cargo and its interior while giving up only its people, that particular form of loss speaks to something the imagination finds especially difficult to accommodate. The vessel endures, the people do not, and a vessel, floating on in their absence, becomes a kind of monument to the question that will never be answered.
There is something about ghost ships, about vessels that float on without their people, that reaches past the rational mind and touches something older and more fundamental. The sea is vast, and the sea does not require a reason for what it does. But these stories are not just about the sea being large and dangerous. They are about a particular, pointed, unsettling kind of absence, the kind that leaves the table set and the lights on and the course maintained, and simply removes the humans who were supposed to be there. Section 7. The Aircraft Files. Planes Lost in Clear Skies. Beyond Flight 19, the Bermuda Triangle has been associated with a remarkable number of aircraft disappearances, some of them occurring in conditions that should have been entirely safe. These are not all ancient mysteries from the dawn of aviation. Some of them occurred in relatively modern times, with reasonably good weather, in well-maintained aircraft operated by experienced crews. And several of them have never been satisfactorily explained. The first disappearances to really capture attention after Flight 19 occurred in quick succession in 1948 and 1949, and both involved the same type of aircraft, the Avro Tudor, a 4-engine British airliner that was one of the more advanced commercial planes of its era.
The first was the Star Tiger, registration GANHP, operated by British South American Airways. On January 30th, 1948, the Star Tiger was on a flight from the Azores to Bermuda, carrying 25 passengers and 6 crew. The aircraft was flying at low altitude to avoid headwinds, and it was late. Fuel reserves had been trimmed to compensate for the extended journey. The captain radioed a routine position report indicating that Bermuda was approximately 200 miles ahead and that the weather was good. That transmission was received. There was no distress call. There was no SOS. No wreckage was ever found. 31 people, gone from clear skies over open water. The investigation into the Star Tiger's disappearance concluded that it could not determine what had happened. The Ministry of Civil Aviation report read with remarkable candor, "What happened in this case will never be known, and the fate of Star Tiger must forever remain an unsolved mystery." 25 words of official admission that the rational world had no answer to offer. Barely a year later, the second Tudor disappeared, the Star Ariel,
registration GAGRE, vanished on January 17, 1949, on a flight from Bermuda to Kingston, Jamaica. Like the Star Tiger, it carried crew and passengers, 7 crew and 13 passengers in this case. The captain sent a routine radio message indicating good weather and smooth progress. And then again, nothing. No distress call, no wreckage, the same aircraft type, the same region, the same inexplicable silence.
The Star Tiger and Star Ariel incidents effectively ended the Avro Tudor's commercial career. British South American Airways suspended the aircraft from service, and the type was never widely used again. There were investigations, and several technical hypotheses were proposed: heating system failures, electrical problems, the low-altitude flying that the Star Tiger had undertaken to avoid headwinds. But none of these theories was definitively proven, and both disappearances were officially classified as unsolved. Also in December of 1948, a Douglas DC-3 charter aircraft vanished while on a flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico, to Miami, Florida. The DC-3 was a legendary aircraft, rugged, reliable, enormously proven by decades of service. The captain sent a routine message approximately 50 miles south of Miami, reporting smooth conditions and good visibility. He asked for landing clearance and gave his estimated time of arrival. Clearance was granted. The DC-3 never landed. No trace of it or its 36 passengers and 3 crew members was ever found. In 1965, a private Cessna 140 disappeared while flying towards the Bahamas. In 1978, a Cessna 182 and its lone pilot vanished near the same area. In 2017, a small private plane flying from Puerto Rico to Florida disappeared from radar without any distress signal. These cases are less famous, less dramatically elaborated in the popular literature, but they contribute to a body of record that is, taken in aggregate, genuinely striking. What is notable about many of these aircraft disappearances is the absence of the distress call. In modern aviation, pilots are trained to follow the procedure: aviate, navigate, communicate. Even in an emergency, a pilot has time in most scenarios to send at least a brief distress transmission. The fact that so many of the flights associated with this region went silent without any final word, even a fragment, even a truncated transmission, is something that aviation investigators have consistently found difficult to explain by reference to ordinary accident scenarios. In more modern times, the disappearances have not entirely stopped. In August of 2008, a Piper PA-46 Malibu with a pilot and 3 passengers vanished on a flight from the Dominican Republic toward Florida. The flight proceeded normally until contact was simply lost over the open water. No distress call was received. The search that followed covered large areas of ocean and found nothing. In 2017, another small aircraft disappeared over the Bahamas without explanation, one of several similar incidents in the region in that decade alone. These are not the famous cases. They will not be written about in books or discussed on television documentaries with dramatic music. But they are real, and they add themselves quietly to the long list of departures without arrivals. There is also the case of the military aircraft that vanished on December 6, 1945, the very next day after Flight 19, a fact that is not as widely cited as it perhaps deserves to be. A consolidated PBY Catalina flying boat and a Martin Mariner, both on search operations related to the Flight 19 disappearance, encountered navigational difficulties and poor weather during the search operations. While the Martin Mariner's loss has been ascribed to probable explosion based on the eyewitness account from the merchant vessel, The Catalina's difficulties that same evening add another layer of complexity to a single 24-hour period that claimed a remarkable number of aircraft. What is notable about the body of Bermuda Triangle aircraft disappearances taken together is how consistent the pattern is. In case after case, the flight proceeds normally. Routine radio communications are made. There is no indication of mechanical distress. And then the communication stops, and the aircraft is never found. The pattern is so consistent, so unlike the pattern of ordinary aviation accidents, which usually produce distress calls, debris fields, and investigators with answers, that it invites the question of what exactly could produce such a uniform kind of vanishing across so many decades and so many different aircraft types.
The rational answers are there. Radio propagation failures, rapid weather deterioration, the Gulf Stream's erasure of evidence, the depth of the water into which aircraft descend after impact. These things can explain the individual cases in isolation, and probably do explain most of them. But the accumulation of the cases, the sheer consistency of the absence, has a quality that feels different from the random distribution of accidents you would expect in a simply dangerous ocean area. It feels like something more specific, more local, something about this particular stretch of sky and sea that produces this particular kind of ending. That feeling may not constitute evidence, but it is not nothing either. The feeling deserves to be noted and then laid quietly back down and allowed to rest alongside all the other things we cannot yet account for. The sky over the Bermuda Triangle is, of course, the same sky that covers the rest of the Atlantic. Aircraft vanish in other parts of the world too. But the concentration of unresolved air disappearances in this region across such a long span of time occupies a particular kind of space in the collective record. Not proof of anything supernatural, but not nothing either. Section 8. The science beneath the surface, methane, currents, and the deep. We have spent some time now with the stories, the disappearances, the fragments of last transmissions, and the long silences that followed them. We have walked slowly through the most haunting individual cases, held them up to the light, turned them over in our hands. Now it is time to go beneath the surface, to look at what science has to say about this place, and about the mechanisms that might explain, in rational and measurable terms, what has happened to the ships and planes that never came home. The first and perhaps most scientifically compelling explanation for disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle region involves something that lies on the ocean floor and deep in the sediment beneath it. It involves a substance called methane hydrate. Methane hydrate is a naturally occurring compound, a crystal structure of water molecules surrounding a methane gas molecule, formed under conditions of high pressure and low temperature, exactly the kind of conditions that exist on the deep ocean floor. In certain parts of the Atlantic, including regions within the Bermuda Triangle, the seafloor contains enormous deposits of methane hydrate. Scientists have known about these deposits for decades. Under normal conditions, they are stable and inert, but they can be destabilized by changes in pressure, by temperature fluctuations, by underwater earthquakes, or by shifts in the ocean floor. When methane hydrate destabilizes, it releases methane gas, and it does not release it slowly or gently.
Laboratory experiments have demonstrated that when methane gas erupts from the ocean floor in sufficient quantities, it can dramatically reduce the density of the water above the eruption site. A ship floating on water whose density has been suddenly and substantially reduced may lose its buoyancy almost instantly, sinking so rapidly that there is no time for a distress call, no time for the crew to deploy life rafts, no time for any response at all. The ship simply goes down, pulled into a churning froth of gas and seawater before it can offer any resistance. There would be little or no wreckage on the surface afterward, because the same gas eruption that sank the ship would create turbulent conditions that would rapidly disperse whatever debris did reach the surface. After the eruption, the sea would return to apparent normalcy within minutes or hours. A searching vessel arriving at the site of such an event might find nothing. The methane hydrate theory also has implications for aircraft. If a large enough methane eruption occurred in an area where a low-flying aircraft was passing overhead, the gas rising through the water and into the air could conceivably ignite, potentially causing an explosion or fire that would destroy the aircraft before any distress transmission could be made. The gas could also, in theory, interfere with engine performance if drawn into an aircraft's intake system, causing sudden power loss.
These are not proven mechanisms. No methane hydrate eruption in the Bermuda Triangle has ever been directly observed or documented. The theory remains a hypothesis, one that scientists take seriously but cannot currently confirm from direct evidence. What is known is that the deposits exist in the region, and that their destabilization and eruption is a real geophysical phenomenon that occurs in various parts of the world's oceans. The Gulf Stream offers a different but equally powerful scientific explanation for the absence of wreckage. We have already discussed the Gulf Stream's physical properties, the northward flow, the speed, the enormous volume of water it moves. But its implications for maritime disasters are worth dwelling on at greater length. When a ship goes down in the Gulf Stream, or when an aircraft crashes into the ocean within the stream's influence, the evidence does not stay put. The current begins moving it immediately. At a typical surface speed of roughly 2 to 5 miles per hour, wreckage and debris can be transported 50 to 100 miles or more within a single day. Within a week, they can be hundreds of miles from the point of the original disaster. In the Atlantic Ocean, which is enormous and largely unmonitored, debris dispersed by the Gulf Stream can simply disappear into the vastness of the sea without ever being found. This is not mysterious in the supernatural sense, it is physics. But it looks to human observers waiting for evidence that never arrives, exactly like a disappearance.
The ocean floor itself is a factor that cannot be overstated. The Puerto Rico Trench reaches depths of nearly 27,500 feet. In depths like that, a sunken ship or crashed aircraft is effectively beyond the reach of any current search technology. Submersibles can reach great depths, but searching enormous areas of deep ocean floor is a project of extraordinary difficulty and expense. The ocean floor in the Bermuda Triangle region is not a flat plane that can be efficiently scanned. It is a complex, fractured landscape of geological features, some of which have never been mapped in detail. Things that go down into those depths can stay there indefinitely, not as a matter of mystery, simply as a matter of physics and geography. The ocean temperatures in the region also create conditions favorable to the rapid biological decomposition of organic material. In warm, nutrient-rich tropical waters, bodies and biological remains can be consumed by marine life and dissolved by warm currents very quickly, far more quickly than in cold water. A body lost at sea in this region might leave no recoverable trace within weeks. The same is true for many organic components of ships and aircraft.
What survives are metal and synthetic materials. But even these can be scattered over enormous areas by currents and eventually buried in sediment.
Taken together, these scientific realities do not make the disappearances less tragic. They do not make the missing people less real, or the unanswered questions less genuinely puzzling. But they do suggest that the absence of evidence, no wreckage, no bodies, no trace, need not imply something supernatural. It may simply imply a sea that is very deep, a current that is very strong, and a set of geophysical conditions that are not kind to the evidence of human disasters. Section 9. The weather and the sea. Rogue waves, waterspouts, and storms. If the science beneath the surface tells part of the story, then the science above it, the weather, the wind, the extraordinary and sometimes catastrophic behavior of the ocean surface in this part of the world, tells another equally important part. The Bermuda Triangle sits in a region of the Atlantic that is, meteorologically speaking, among the most dynamic and unpredictable on the planet. It is within the zone affected by Atlantic hurricane activity, which runs roughly from June through November and can produce some of the most violent weather systems on Earth. But hurricanes, as terrifying as they are at least predictable in their general character. They are large, they move relatively slowly, and modern meteorology can track them across the ocean with considerable accuracy. It is the smaller, faster, less predictable weather phenomena in this region that pose the most immediate danger to ships and aircraft. Waterspouts are perhaps the most visually dramatic of these. A waterspout is essentially a tornado over water, a rotating column of air and water droplets extending from a cloud to the ocean's surface, capable of winds that can reach 80 miles per hour or more in the most severe cases. They form with extraordinary speed in warm, humid conditions, and the Bermuda Triangle region provides exactly the combination of warm sea surface temperature and unstable atmospheric conditions that waterspouts thrive in. A waterspout can form, reach full intensity, pass over a vessel, and dissipate again in a matter of minutes. If it strikes a small ship or pleasure craft, the damage can be catastrophic and nearly instantaneous. If it strikes a low-flying aircraft, the results are equally devastating. And after the waterspout has gone, the sea around it will begin returning to normalcy with the indifference of a place that has no interest in explaining itself. Sudden squalls are another significant hazard. In the tropics and semi-tropics, convective storms, thunderstorms born of rapidly rising warm air, can develop in as little as 30 to 45 minutes from clear skies to severe conditions. A ship's captain who read calm weather in the morning and made decisions based on that reading might find themselves in deteriorating conditions by early afternoon. Pilots in small aircraft flying under visual flight rules rather than instrument flight rules can suddenly find themselves enveloped in cloud, rain, and wind that they have no instruments to safely navigate. Spatial disorientation, the terrifying condition in which a pilot loses their sense of which way is up because they cannot see the horizon and their inner ear is giving them false information, is one of the leading causes of aviation accidents, and the rapidly changing weather of the Bermuda Triangle region creates exactly the conditions that produce it. But perhaps the most scientifically interesting and least understood weather phenomenon associated with the Bermuda Triangle in recent years is the hexagonal cloud formation. In 2016, scientists studying satellite imagery of the Bahama Banks, a shallow water platform within the Triangle region, noticed something unusual.
Hexagonal clouds, clouds with straight angular edges forming roughly six-sided shapes, were appearing over the region with some regularity. These formations are unusual because clouds are normally random in their distribution, their edges curved and irregular by the nature of how they form. Straight-edged geometric clouds suggest a different mechanism.
Meteorologists studying the phenomenon proposed that these hexagonal clouds might be producing what they called air bombs, intense microburst events in which wind falls straight down from the base of the cloud at extraordinary speed and then spreads outward when it hits the ocean surface. The speeds involved in these microbursts were estimated at up to 170 miles per hour. A microburst of that intensity hitting a ship would be equivalent to an enormous weight of air striking the vessel from above and then being flung outward horizontally. The wave action produced by a localized wind event of that speed would be severe and nearly instantaneous. An aircraft flying through the base of a cloud producing such conditions would face wind shear of a severity sufficient to tear the aircraft apart or send it into an unrecoverable dive. Not all meteorologists agreed with the most dramatic interpretation of the hexagonal cloud findings. Some pointed out that similar cloud formations exist over other parts of the ocean and are not associated with any pattern of unusual disasters. The debate continued, but the observation itself that this region produces unusual, geometrically striking cloud formations associated with intense downward wind events was genuine and scientifically interesting. Then there are rogue waves. For most of human maritime history, rogue waves were considered a sailor's legend. Enormous, single waves rising impossibly out of relatively calm seas, towering above normal wave heights like a wall of black water appearing from nowhere. Sailors told stories about them for centuries, but scientists were largely skeptical. In 1995, a wave measuring more than 80 feet high struck the Draupner oil platform off the coast of Norway, and the measurement was recorded by instruments on the platform. The existence of rogue waves was, from that moment, not a matter of debate. They are real. They occur in various oceans, and in the warm, current-influenced, atmospherically volatile waters of the Bermuda Triangle region, the conditions for their formation may be more favorable than in many other places. A rogue wave of 80 feet or more striking a ship at sea would be catastrophic. The ship would have no warning. There would be no time to turn into the wave, no time to batten hatches, no time to do anything except the very human act of holding on and hoping. A wave of that size striking a ship at the wrong angle can capsize the largest vessels in seconds. The wave passes, the sea returns to its previous state, and where a ship had been, there is now only disturbed water, already being moved by the current, already carrying whatever debris the wave's force has scattered across the surface.
The weather above the Bermuda Triangle is not a mystery. It is meteorology. But it is meteorology at its most extreme and unpredictable, in a region that sits at the intersection of warm ocean surface temperatures, active atmospheric convection, and the organizing influence of the Gulf Stream. The weather here can change faster than ships can maneuver, and faster than pilots can respond. It does not ask permission before it acts, and it leaves no record of its work.
But in 1918, when the Cyclops disappeared, None of this existed. Navigation was done by compass, by celestial observation, taking sights on the stars or the sun, and by dead reckoning, the process of calculating your current position based on your last known position, your speed, your heading, and the time that has elapsed since. Dead reckoning is a skill that requires constant attention and frequent correction. Errors accumulate. A slight misjudgment of speed, a heading that drifts a degree or two off true, a current that is stronger than expected. All of these compound over hours and days into positional errors that can place a ship many miles from where its navigator believes it to be. For the Cyclops, heavily laden with manganese ore, sailing with one engine reported as unreliable, any navigation error that placed the ship in the path of a severe storm rather than clear of it could have been catastrophic.
For the pilots of Flight 19, flying in 1945, the situation was more modern but still far removed from what we have today. The TBM Avenger was equipped with a magnetic compass and a directional gyroscope for heading, and a clock and a speed indicator for dead reckoning. There was no GPS. There was no transponder broadcasting their position continuously. Radio navigation aids existed, but they required the pilot to take bearings on ground stations and triangulate their position, a process that requires skill and practice and works best when the pilot has a clear, calm environment in which to operate. Lieutenant Taylor's compass confusion was not simply a matter of a defective instrument. It was a navigational crisis unfolding in deteriorating conditions, with student pilots in the other 4 aircraft looking to him for leadership, with the winter afternoon darkening around them, and with the fuel gauges moving steadily towards empty. Compass anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle region are real and have been acknowledged since Christopher Columbus's first voyage. The region is one of a small number of places on Earth where magnetic north and true geographic north are approximately aligned, meaning that a compass here does not show the usual offset that navigators learn to apply when working in most other parts of the world. A pilot or sailor used to making that offset correction as a matter of habit could find their calculations thrown off in this region if they applied the correction they would normally use elsewhere. This is not supernatural. It is a characteristic of the Earth's magnetic field at this particular longitude, but it is a real source of navigational error for people who do not know to account for it.
Poor judgment under stress is another factor that is difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Human beings under stress, frightened, exhausted, uncertain, make decisions differently than human beings in calm, controlled environments. The mental phenomenon of confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret new information in ways that confirm your existing belief rather than challenge it, can be fatal in a navigational emergency. Lieutenant Taylor apparently became convinced that he was over the Keys rather than the Bahamas. Having formed that conviction, he may have interpreted subsequent observations in ways that confirmed it rather than challenged it. Each passing minute of flying in the wrong direction made the crisis worse. Each degree of heading change based on the wrong assumption pushed Flight 19 further from safety rather than closer to it. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has stated clearly and unambiguously that there is no evidence that mysterious disappearances occur with greater frequency in the Bermuda Triangle than in any other large, heavily traveled area of the ocean. John Riley, a historian with the U.S. Naval Historical Foundation, has pointed out that the region is one of the most heavily traveled stretches of water in the world, and that to note a number of ship and aircraft losses there is roughly analogous to noting a number of traffic accidents on a major highway. Traffic volume matters. The more ships and planes that pass through an area, the more opportunity there is for accidents to occur. These are reasonable, grounded, sobering perspectives, and they deserve to be heard. Human error, navigational misjudgment, weather, geography, the indifferent mathematics of traffic volume, these things can explain a great deal of what the legend of the Bermuda Triangle has chosen to frame as mystery. And yet, the absence of wreckage from some of these incidents, the complete silence of the final transmissions, the ships and planes that left port or runway in good conditions and simply never arrived. Human error and adverse weather can account for many things. Whether they can account for all of it is a question that honest inquiry cannot answer with complete confidence. But the Bermuda Triangle's mythology has never been content to rest in the reasonable. From the moment Charles Berlitz's book became a global sensation in 1974, the more extraordinary explanations for the Triangle's mysteries have lived alongside the scientific ones, stubbornly refusing to be dismissed. And while none of them can be taken seriously as factual claims, they are part of the story of this place. They tell us something important, not about the ocean, but about ourselves, about what human beings reach for when ordinary explanations feel insufficient. The most persistent of the extraordinary theories, and in some ways the most beautiful, is the Atlantis connection. Plato described Atlantis in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, written in approximately 360 BCE. He described a great maritime civilization of enormous sophistication and power, located on a large island in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. According to Plato's account, Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophic flooding, sinking beneath the waves and disappearing from the world entirely. Whether Plato intended this as a historical account or as a philosophical allegory has been debated by scholars for 2,500 years. The Bermuda Triangle's geographic position in the Western Atlantic and the extraordinary depth of some of its waters has made it a natural candidate for theories linking it to the alleged location of Atlantis. Berlitz, in his 1974 book, gave considerable space to this theory, suggesting that the ruins of Atlantis lie beneath the waters of the Triangle, and that some form of energy technology used by the Atlantean civilization, crystal-based power sources were a popular hypothesis, continues to operate on the ocean floor, interfering with the navigation and propulsion systems of modern ships and aircraft. This theory has no credible scientific support. The geological record of the ocean floor in the Bermuda Triangle region does not show evidence of a sunken continent. The geological timescales involved in the formation of ocean basins are entirely incompatible with human civilization. But the Bimini Road, a formation of flat limestone blocks discovered underwater near the Bimini Islands in the Bahamas in 1968, attracted considerable attention from Atlantis theorists because of its regular geometric appearance. Subsequent geological analysis has concluded that the Bimini Road is a naturally occurring formation called beach rock, formed when beach sand is cemented into limestone by calcium carbonate, a process that can create surprisingly regular pavement-like formations.
But the discovery fed the Atlantis narrative in ways that no amount of geological explanation has entirely put to rest.
The alien abduction theory arrived, predictably, in the same cultural moment that produced close encounters of the third kind and a general flowering of UFO mythology in the 1970s. The Bermuda Triangle, with its pattern of unexplained disappearances, slotted naturally into a narrative framework that was already popular. Ships and planes had been taken, the theory went, by extraterrestrial craft, either abducted directly from the air and sea or drawn down into an underwater alien base that existed somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic. The Bermuda Triangle was, in this telling, a kind of interstellar port of call, a place where beings from elsewhere came and went on missions we could not comprehend. This theory has no evidence supporting it, but it has the considerable advantage of being impossible to definitively disprove, which in conspiracy-minded communities functions effectively as proof. If you find wreckage, the ships weren't taken by aliens. If you don't find wreckage, the aliens took the ships and removed the evidence. The theory is, by design, unfalsifiable. The time warp theory, the idea that the Bermuda Triangle contains some form of temporal anomaly that displaces ships and aircraft into the past or future, has appeared in popular books, television specials, and endless online discussions. It draws some vague inspiration from real physics. Einstein's general theory of relativity does establish that time is not constant and can be affected by gravity and velocity, and quantum mechanics contains phenomena that are genuinely counterintuitive about the nature of time and space. But the leap from these legitimate scientific concepts to an ocean region that is somehow warping the passage of time is enormous and entirely unsupported by any evidence. There is also the electronic fog theory, promoted primarily by pilot and author Bruce Gernon, who claims to have flown through a strange, rapidly forming cloud formation in the Bermuda Triangle in 1970 that enveloped his aircraft, caused his instruments to malfunction, and apparently caused him to cover a distance in a fraction of the time that should have been required. Gernon has described the experience in detail over many years and maintains that it represented a genuine encounter with some form of electromagnetic tunnel that distorted both space and time. His account is vivid and apparently sincere, but it remains a single personal account that has not been independently verified or explained by any recognized physical mechanism. What is interesting about all of these extraordinary theories is not their scientific credibility, which is low to non-existent, but what they tell us about the human response to mystery. We are a species that is genuinely uncomfortable with the unexplained. We want answers. We want mechanism. We want agency, even if the agency is alien, even if the mechanism is supernatural, even if the explanation requires accepting things that our scientific framework cannot accommodate. The Bermuda Triangle, in its refusal to be entirely explained by ordinary means, has become a vessel for all of that discomfort, a place onto which we project our uncertainty about the limits of human knowledge, our ancient unease with the sea, and our persistent, stubborn hope that the world is stranger and more vast and more interesting than the dry facts of meteorology and navigation would suggest.
In that sense, the Bermuda Triangle is not just a geographical location, it is a mirror. And what it reflects back at us is perhaps more interesting than any alien base or temporal anomaly could ever be. Section 12. What Lloyd's of London actually says. Here is where we slow down even further and spend some time with the most unglamorous part of the Bermuda Triangle story, the insurance rates.
Lloyd's of London is the world's oldest and most respected insurance market. It has been operating continuously since 1688, and over those more than 300 years, it has developed something very close to an institutional memory for maritime risk. If there is a part of the ocean that is genuinely, demonstrably more dangerous than the rest of the ocean, Lloyd's of London knows about it. If ships are being lost at a rate above normal expectation in a particular region, that information translates directly into higher insurance premiums for vessels operating in that region. Insurance is, at its core, the quantification of risk, and quantified risk does not respond to legends or stories or cultural mythology. It responds to data.
This is significant. It is not a trivial observation. If ships were genuinely disappearing in the Bermuda Triangle at rates significantly above the norm for comparable ocean areas, Lloyd's would know. They would price that risk accordingly. Premiums would be higher. Underwriters would be more cautious. The absence of elevated premiums is, in the logic of insurance, a statement that the data does not support the legend. The US Coast Guard has made similar statements. Their official position, established over many years of handling maritime emergencies in the region, is that the number of incidents in the Bermuda Triangle is not disproportionate to the volume of traffic that passes through the area. The Bermuda Triangle is, as has been noted, one of the most heavily traveled stretches of ocean in the world. It lies at the intersection of major shipping lanes connecting the eastern seaboard of the United States with the Caribbean and South America, and major transatlantic routes connecting North America with Europe. The sheer volume of maritime traffic that crosses this region daily means that accidents, mechanical failures, weather-related emergencies, and navigational errors are statistically expected to occur there in larger absolute numbers than in less traveled regions. This does not mean the triangle is more dangerous per unit of traffic. It means it handles more traffic.
Lawrence Cush's research, which we discussed earlier, found that many of the specific incidents cited as Bermuda Triangle mysteries had mundane explanations that had been omitted or distorted in popular accounts. Ships that vanished in supposedly calm weather had actually gone down in documented storms. Disappearances attributed to the triangle had occurred far outside its boundaries. Some incidents appeared to have been invented entirely, with no historical record of them in the maritime or aviation records of the period. Cush was direct in his conclusion. The Bermuda Triangle mystery, as a coherent and exceptional phenomenon, was largely a product of careless research and sensational writing, rather than a genuine statistical anomaly in maritime and aviation safety records. And yet, even Cush acknowledged that a residue of genuinely unexplained incidents remained after his research had stripped away the manufactured and exaggerated cases. The USS Cyclops, Flight 19, the Star Tiger and Star Ariel, the disappearance of the Witchcraft within 19 minutes of a calm radio call a mile from shore. These cases did not collapse under scrutiny the way many others did. They remained stubbornly, genuinely unexplained. Their evidence, or rather their lack of evidence, resisted the application of obvious rational explanations.
So what does Lloyd's of London actually tell us? It tells us that the Bermuda Triangle is not the supernatural death zone of popular mythology. It is not a place that swallows ships at a rate that the insurance industry, the most commercially hard-nosed and data-driven assessor of maritime risk in the world, finds statistically unusual. In the aggregate, across all the traffic that passes through it, the Bermuda Triangle appears to be roughly as dangerous as any other comparably sized, comparably busy stretch of ocean.
But the aggregate hides the individual cases. And the individual cases, the ones that survived Cush's scrutiny, the ones that don't have neat explanations attached to them, continue to ask their quiet, persistent questions, and never arrived anywhere. Just about what happened to 14 men and 5 planes that took off from Florida on a clear December afternoon and never landed. The data says ordinary. The individual cases say not entirely. Section 13. The Survivors. People who passed through and came back. The Bermuda Triangle, for all its dark reputation, is crossed continuously, every day, by cruise ships carrying thousands of passengers, by cargo freighters moving goods between the ports of the Caribbean, the United States, and beyond, by private yachts, by fishing boats, by military vessels, by commercial aircraft flying at 35,000 feet on routes from Miami to San Juan, from New York to Bermuda, from Nassau to everywhere. The vast, overwhelming majority of these crossings are uneventful. This is worth saying clearly and at some length, because the legend of the Bermuda Triangle has a tendency to make the region sound like a place you cannot enter without risk of disappearance. The truth is that the Bermuda Triangle is one of the most traveled ocean regions in the world, and most of the millions of people who have passed through it over the decades have done so without incident, without unusual experiences, without strange compass behavior or mysterious fogs, or anything other than ordinary sea and sky. Pilots who fly commercial routes through the Triangle's airspace report nothing unusual. The region's air traffic control, managed primarily from Miami, handles thousands of flights per week through its airspace, without the peculiarities that the legend implies. Weather complications exist, as they do on any oceanic flying route. Occasionally, flights divert to avoid developing storm systems, which is standard procedure anywhere in the tropical Atlantic during storm season. But the eerie, inexplicable failures of navigation and communication that characterize the Triangle's most famous cases are not, in the experience of the vast majority of pilots who operate in the region, a routine feature of flying there. Sailors in the cruising community, people who sail privately across the Atlantic and through the Caribbean for pleasure, cross the Triangle region constantly. The Bermuda Island itself is a popular sailing destination from the east coast of the United States, with races like the Newport to Bermuda race running regularly since 1906 and attracting hundreds of yacht entries. These sailors report the usual challenges of offshore sailing: changing weather, demanding navigation, occasionally rough conditions. They do not report a pattern of compass failures, electronic malfunctions, or mysterious phenomena beyond the ordinary hazards of the sea.
Bruce Gernon, whom we mentioned earlier in connection with the electronic fog theory, is one of the more credible first-hand accounts of an unusual experience in the Triangle. Gernon, an experienced pilot, has described in detail a flight in December of 1970 in which he flew through a peculiar cloud formation that he says enveloped his Beechcraft Bonanza,
caused his instruments to behave strangely, and resulted in what he experienced as an apparent acceleration of time, covering the distance from Andros Island to Miami in what he believed was a fraction of the normal time. Whether Gurnon's experience was the result of some genuinely anomalous physical phenomenon, an unusual meteorological event, a mild disruption in his instruments combined with the disorientation of flying in cloud, or some combination of these, is not possible to determine from the outside. But Gurnon himself has never claimed that his experience was supernatural, only that it was unusual and that he could not fully account for it in ordinary terms. There are other accounts of strange experiences in the region. Lights seen on the water at night with no obvious source, electronic compass fluctuations in otherwise well-maintained aircraft, radio communications that seem to disappear into static without reason. Most of these can be accounted for by ordinary physics. Ball lightning, a real but poorly understood atmospheric phenomenon, can produce unexpected lights at sea. Magnetic anomalies in the region are well documented and can affect compass readings. Radio propagation in the tropical Atlantic can be affected by atmospheric ducting and ionospheric interference in ways that cause signals to disappear or become distorted. None of this requires invoking the supernatural.
What the experience of the countless thousands of people who have passed safely through the Bermuda Triangle tells us is that the region is not uniquely, reliably deadly. It is not a trap. It is not a door that opens to somewhere else. It is an ocean. A busy, warm, sometimes violent, often beautiful, occasionally hazardous ocean. The same forces that have always governed the sea, weather, current, depth, navigation, the limits of human technology and human judgment, govern it here too. Consider the Newport to Bermuda race, which has been running since 1906 and is one of the oldest offshore sailing races in the world. Hundreds of yachts, some crewed by amateur sailors, cross the full breadth of the Triangle's geography every 2 years in pursuit of nothing more mysterious than a trophy and the quiet pride of a long offshore passage completed well. The race's safety record over more than a century is consistent with the general safety record of offshore sailing. Occasional incidents, very rare fatalities, the normal statistical hazards of spending time at sea in relatively small boats. Not an anomalous body count, not a pattern of inexplicable vanishings. Commercial airline pilots who fly the Miami-Bermuda and Miami-San Juan routes that pass directly through the Triangle's airspace, have been consistent in their accounts when asked. The weather in the region can be challenging, particularly during summer storm season. Turbulence can be significant. But the specific electronic and navigational anomalies described in the Triangle's mythology are not, in the experience of professional pilots flying modern aircraft, a routine feature of operating in the region. GPS works, radios work, instruments behave as they are designed to behave. The sky over the Bermuda Triangle is, for the vast majority of people who fly through it, simply sky. Even among the community of sailors and pilots who have had experiences they found genuinely difficult to explain in ordinary terms, the accounts are far less dramatic than the legend suggests. Compass deviations, yes, but compass deviations are documented in the region and have known causes related to the magnetic field. Radio static and signal loss, yes, but the Atlantic is not a forgiving radio propagation environment, and signal loss in the region is documented and unremarkable. Strange lights at sea, yes, but the Atlantic at night is a dark place full of bioluminescence, of distant ships, of atmospheric phenomena that can produce unexpected visual effects for tired sailors watching a dark horizon. None of this is the stuff of supernatural mystery.
all of it is the stuff of a challenging ocean environment encountered by human beings with fallible equipment.
What the experience of survivors and safe crossers tells us, ultimately, is that the Bermuda Triangle deserves a more measured kind of respect than the legend implies. Not the terror of a death zone, not the casual dismissal of a pure fiction, something more honest than either. A recognition that this is a place where the physical world is challenging in ways that are real and sometimes dangerous, where history has accumulated genuine tragedies that have not been fully explained, and where the great majority of those who pass through it do so safely and without incident. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle is not the mystery of a place that kills everyone who enters it. It is the mystery of a small number of specific incidents occurring over a long span of time in which ships and planes and people disappeared without adequate explanation. That is a more modest mystery than the legend implies, but it is still, in those specific cases, a real one. Section 14. Modern Investigations. What we know now. The investigation of the Bermuda Triangle has not stood still. Science moves forward, and the tools available to researchers who want to understand what has happened in this region of the Atlantic have become progressively more sophisticated over the decades. Satellite imaging can now survey large areas of ocean with a resolution and coverage that was unimaginable even 30 years ago. Underwater, remotely operated vehicles and autonomous submersibles can now reach depths that were previously inaccessible. Side-scan sonar technology can produce detailed maps of the ocean floor over large areas. DNA analysis can identify remains that visual examination alone could never resolve. The modern investigative toolkit is formidably powerful.
And yet, as of the time of this writing, none of the major unexplained disappearances associated with the Bermuda Triangle have been definitively resolved. The USS Cyclops has not been found. The aircraft of Flight 19 have not been definitively located. The Star Tiger and Star Ariel have not been recovered. The Witchcraft has not been found. This is partly a function of the sheer scale of the ocean floor that would need to be searched, and partly a reflection of the still very limited coverage that even advanced sonar and imaging technology can achieve in deep water over large areas. There have been some findings that are suggestive, though not conclusive. Aircraft that may be from the Flight 19 era have been located in the waters off Fort Lauderdale, but the serial numbers have not definitively matched any of the 5 Avengers. In the early 1990s, some partial remains of what might have been the PBM Mariner that disappeared the same night as Flight 19 were reportedly identified, but the identification was never confirmed to a standard that would satisfy a formal investigation. The hexagonal cloud research, which we discussed in the weather section, represented a genuinely new scientific contribution to the debate when it was published in the mid-2010s. The use of satellite weather imagery to identify a recurring meteorological phenomenon specific to the Bermuda Triangle region, the straight-edged geometric cloud formations producing intense microburst conditions, was an example of the kind of incremental scientific work that gradually builds a more complete picture of what this region of the ocean is actually like. It did not solve any specific disappearance, but it added to the catalogue of known physical hazards in the region in a way that is genuinely useful.
Research into methane hydrate deposits on the Atlantic floor has also continued. Scientists with the U.S. Geological Survey and international research institutions have been mapping hydrate deposits in various ocean areas, including regions of the Western Atlantic, for several decades. The picture that has emerged is one of extensive and widespread deposits in the deep ocean sediments of the region, with evidence of historical eruptions and destabilization events visible in the geological record. None of this proves that a methane eruption sank any specific ship, but it does establish that the mechanism exists and that it has been active in the region. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration maintains its position that the Bermuda Triangle does not present statistically anomalous dangers. Their ocean monitoring systems, their weather satellites, and their Coast Guard operations have produced an enormous quantity of data about conditions in the region over the past several decades. This data supports the view that the Bermuda Triangle is a challenging but not uniquely deadly stretch of ocean, that the normal forces of maritime hazard applied to an area with very high traffic volume account for most of what has been recorded there.
More recent disappearances within the region have also been studied with considerably more investigative tools than were available to researchers working on the older cases. The 2015 sinking of the SS El Faro, a cargo ship that went down during Hurricane Joaquin in the eastern Bahamas, was thoroughly investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board. The ship's voyage data recorder was recovered from a depth of more than 15,000 feet. The sequence of events that led to the ship's loss was reconstructed in considerable detail. It was a story of decision-making under pressure, of inadequate weather information, of a ship in a poorly maintained condition encountering a hurricane that had tracked more erratically than the forecasts had predicted. It was a human story, a sad, preventable, entirely explicable story. The El Faro case is, in a sense, instructive. When modern investigative tools are brought to bear, when data recorders are recovered and analyzed, when witnesses are interviewed and records examined, the mysteries dissolve into ordinary tragedy. The El Faro's loss was devastating, but it was not mysterious. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, such as it is, lives in the space before these tools existed. In the cases where the data recorder was never recovered because the ship never came home, where the radio fell silent before any final transmission could be sent, where the ocean accepted what the sky gave it and asked nothing further. Section 15. Other Mysterious Zones, the Devil's Sea and Beyond.
The Bermuda Triangle is not the only stretch of ocean that has accumulated a reputation for mysterious disappearances. There are other places in the world's oceans that have, over the centuries and decades, generated similar stories of unexplained losses and strange phenomena. Some of these are less well known to Western audiences, but are taken just as seriously in their home cultures. The most famous counterpart to the Bermuda Triangle is the Devil's Sea, also known as the Dragon's Triangle, a region of the Pacific Ocean that lies roughly south and east of Japan, extending toward the Mariana Islands. Like the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea has boundaries that are not precisely defined. Different accounts place it in different positions, and the estimates of its area range widely. It is a region known for volcanic activity, for frequent seismic events, for strong and unpredictable currents, and for weather that can change rapidly and violently. The Devil's Sea acquired its reputation over centuries of Japanese maritime history. Fishing vessels, merchant ships, and naval craft have been lost in the region, going back to medieval times. The legend of the Dragon's Triangle draws on traditional Japanese beliefs about sea dragons inhabiting the deep water of the Pacific, creatures that pull ships down from below, that send storms to drive mariners off course.
In the mid-20th century, a Japanese fishing vessel and several other ships reportedly disappeared in the region within a relatively short span of time, and Japanese maritime authorities responded with enough concern to briefly classify the area as dangerous. The comparison to the Bermuda Triangle was made by Charles Berlitz in his follow-up book on the Devil's Triangle in the 1980s, which brought the Pacific region to wider international attention.
The geology of the Devil's Sea region is dramatically different from that of the Bermuda Triangle, but equally capable of producing sudden, violent maritime hazards. The area sits over one of the most seismically active zones in the world, part of the Pacific Ring of Fire. Submarine volcanoes in the region can erupt with little warning, producing enormous upwellings of heated water, gas and steam that can affect sea conditions dramatically. Underwater earthquakes can generate tsunamis, which in the deep ocean are not the dramatic waves they become in shallow coastal waters. They travel as relatively low height but enormously powerful swells that can destabilize ships in unexpected ways. And the currents of the Western Pacific in this region are complex and strong, capable of the same evidence-erasing work that the Gulf Stream performs in the Atlantic. There are other zones with similar reputations. The Sable Island region off the coast of Nova Scotia has been called the graveyard of the Atlantic, and for reasons more grounded in simple geography than mystery. It is a long, shallow sandbar extending from a treacherous point of land, directly in the path of ships navigating from Europe to North America. The sandbar shifts constantly, the fog is frequent and thick, the currents are strong and unpredictable. More than 350 documented shipwrecks surround the island, earned the honest way, through geography and weather, rather than through any mythological agency. The waters off Cape Hatteras in North Carolina are similarly notorious. Here, the Gulf Stream and the cooler coastal waters of the American East Coast meet, producing violent storms, unpredictable currents, and shallow offshore shoals that have claimed hundreds of ships over the centuries. The lighthouse at Cape Hatteras is the tallest in the United States, built specifically to warn mariners away from this particularly treacherous stretch of coast. What all of these places have in common is not mystery in the supernatural sense. They are areas where the physical geography of the ocean, the depth, the currents, the weather patterns, the seismology, the geology, creates conditions that are genuinely more hazardous than average. And in eras when navigational technology was limited and weather forecasting was primitive, these hazards were far less well understood and far more likely to claim ships and crews without offering adequate warning. The Bermuda Triangle fits into this global pattern of hazardous ocean regions, and in some ways it is simply the most famous example of a phenomenon that occurs in various places around the world. It has the additional advantage, or disadvantage depending on your perspective, of having been publicized at exactly the right cultural moment, in the 1970s, when public appetite for mystery, conspiracy, and the extraordinary was particularly high. That timing gave it a staying power in the popular imagination that its sister mysteries, the Devil's Sea and the waters off Cape Hatteras and the graveyard of the Atlantic, have not quite matched. There is a lake in the interior of North America, Lake Superior, the largest of the Great Lakes, that has its own quiet tradition of mysterious disappearances. More than 350 documented shipwrecks rest on its floor, and several of the most significant sinkings occurred in conditions that the surviving evidence did not fully account for. The Edmund Fitzgerald,
a massive ore carrier that sank in a November storm in 1975 with 29 men aboard, produced no distress call and no survivors, and the exact cause of its sinking is still officially listed as undetermined. Lake Superior is not warm. It does not have the Gulf Stream to disperse evidence, but its depths are considerable, its storms are violent, and its tendency to keep what the water takes is very much a character trait it shares with the Atlantic. There is a reason the Gordon Lightfoot song about the Edmund Fitzgerald has the resonance it does. It is about the same ancient, unanswerable quality of the sea's silence that makes the Bermuda Triangle compelling. The question that cannot be answered. The men who did not come home and left no explanation behind.
The Yellow Sea between China and Korea has its own history of unexplained maritime losses, as do the streets of the Indonesian archipelago, the notoriously treacherous waters around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, and the roaring forties of the Southern Ocean. In each case, the local geography and meteorology create conditions that are genuinely more dangerous than average. In each case, the historical record contains individual losses that have not been fully explained. In each case, the human imagination has woven those individual losses into something that feels larger than the sum of its parts, a pattern, a personality, a sense that this particular patch of water has something against us. But the Bermuda Triangle's fame does not make it unique. It makes it the most prominent representative of a real category of thing, a place where the ocean is more dangerous than it looks, where the ordinary forces of the physical world can produce outcomes that the surviving record makes look unexplained, and where the human tendency to find pattern and meaning in tragedy has woven individual losses into something that feels like a coherent, intentional, and perhaps even living mystery. Section 16. Closing. The triangle endures.
We have come a long way tonight. We began at the surface of the thing, the name, the legend, the cultural phenomenon, and we have spent these quiet hours moving steadily deeper into it. We have mapped the geography. We have walked through the most famous individual disappearances with patience and attention. We have sat with the science, given it its due, let it speak in the careful, precise language that science uses. We have visited the extraordinary theories and treated them with the fairness that fairness requires, which means acknowledging that they cannot be proven, while also acknowledging that the enduring human impulse toward mystery is not itself irrational. And we have noted what the dry accounting of insurance rates and statistical analysis suggests, that the Bermuda Triangle is not the reliable death zone that its mythology implies. And where does all of that leave us? It leaves us, perhaps, in approximately the same place where honest inquiry about this particular subject always ends up, in a place of productive uncertainty, of genuine not knowing. The Bermuda Triangle, stripped of its most theatrical embellishments, is still a region of the Atlantic where a meaningful number of ships and aircraft have disappeared without adequate explanation. Not in numbers that statistical analysis finds remarkable, but in specific cases, individual cases that resist the comfortable application of ordinary explanations. The USS Cyclops is gone, and no one has found it. Flight 19 is gone, and no wreckage has been definitively confirmed. The Star Tiger is gone. The Witchcraft is gone. These are real losses. These were real people, and the ocean has kept their secrets with a completeness that, even accounting for depth and currents and the passage of time, is at least worthy of quiet contemplation. The truth is that the ocean is very old and very large, and we have known it only briefly and imperfectly. For all of human history, the sea has been the boundary of what is knowable, the place where the map ran out and the imagination filled the remaining space. The Bermuda Triangle sits at that edge. It always has. Even in an age of GPS and satellite imaging and deep-sea submersibles, there are parts of the ocean floor in this region that have never been seen by any human eye or any instrument we have built. There is a lot of darkness down there, a lot of depth, a lot of cold, silent, pressurized space where things can rest undiscovered for generations. It would be dishonest to tell you, at the end of this long journey through the evidence, that the Bermuda Triangle is definitively explained by science, because it isn't. The most rational framework for understanding it, high traffic volume, challenging weather, powerful currents, deep water, human error, is probably correct in its broad outlines and explains most of what the legend has credited to mystery. But most is not all, and the specific cases that survive rigorous skeptical examination are genuinely, honestly unexplained.
It would be equally dishonest to tell you that the Bermuda Triangle is a supernatural phenomenon, a portal, a device, a trap set by something inhuman and intentional, because there is no credible evidence for any of that. The extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the extraordinary evidence has never arrived. What we have in place of that evidence is stories, vivid, human, sometimes heartbreaking stories about people who set out across the ocean or into the sky and never arrived where they were going. Stories that the ocean has never seen fit to correct or explain. And maybe that is what makes this particular stretch of water so persistently captivating. Not the alien bases or the lost continent or the time warps, but the simpler, quieter, more profound mystery at the heart of it. That the world is still large enough to hold unexplained things. That the ocean is still deep enough to keep its own counsel. That for all our technology and all our understanding, there are questions we have asked for decades that the sea has not answered and may never answer. There is something oddly comforting about that. Not frightening, comforting. The idea that we have not yet mapped everything, that wonder is still possible, that somewhere between three imaginary points drawn on the surface of the Atlantic, the water is still warm and very deep, and the sky above it is still vast and very dark, and the questions we cannot answer sleep quietly there, just below the surface, waiting patiently for a generation that might someday find them.
We live in an age that is sometimes called the information age, and that name implies a kind of completion, the suggestion that information is what the world is made of, and that enough of it can eventually account for everything. The universe in this framing is fundamentally legible. Given sufficient data, sufficient computing power, sufficient time and attention, all mysteries yield, or questions eventually meet their answers. The blank spaces on the map fill in, the silences find their explanations. The Bermuda Triangle quietly dissents from this reassurance, not because it is genuinely supernatural, it almost certainly is not,
Not because it harbors anything alien or magical, there is no credible reason to believe it does, but because it is a reminder that the legibility of the world is not yet complete, that the oceans still hold things we cannot see, that there are questions the physical record has not preserved the means to answer, and that human beings, for all their ingenuity and all their instruments, are still relatively small creatures navigating an enormously large planet. The men of the USS Cyclops, the aviators of Flight 19, the passengers of the Star Tiger, the crew of the Carroll A. Deering. These were people who trusted the ordinary mechanisms of the world, ships, aircraft, engines, compasses, weather forecasts, and found on a particular day in a particular stretch of ocean or sky that the ordinary mechanisms had run out. Whatever happened to them, and we have spent a long time tonight considering what that might have been, happened completely. It left no trail, no fragment, no final word legible enough to constitute an explanation.
And so they remain in the imagination of everyone who has ever heard their stories, in a kind of suspension, not gone the way we understand gone, not arrived anywhere either, simply unaccounted for, somewhere between departure and arrival, in a stretch of warm Atlantic water, on an afternoon or a night in a year that recedes further into history with each passing decade, still waiting, perhaps, for the answer that has not yet arrived. That is a melancholy thought, but it is also, if you hold it in a certain light, a strangely beautiful one, because the not knowing is a form of presence. As long as we do not know what happened to Flight 19, they are in some sense still out there, still flying their Avengers over a December Atlantic, their voices still crackling through the static of a radio transmission that the years have not quite silenced. As long as we do not know what happened to the Cyclops, it is still somewhere in the deep water, enormous, still, resting in the dark at the bottom of a sea that keeps its secrets with a thoroughness that borders on the devoted. The mystery is the memorial, the not knowing is the monument. And perhaps that is the most honest thing that can be said about the Bermuda Triangle after all this time and all this inquiry, that it is a place where the mystery has outlasted the people, and where the people, because of the mystery, have not been entirely forgotten. Tonight we are not that generation. Tonight we are just people, resting in the dark, listening to old stories about the sea. And the sea, as it always has, simply keeps moving. Somewhere a ship is crossing that invisible boundary right now. Its lights are reflected in the black water below. Its passengers are asleep in their cabins, wrapped in the ordinary safety of a vessel in motion, surrounded by the warm Atlantic night. They will cross those imaginary lines without knowing it. They will emerge on the other side. They will arrive where they are going. And that is the truth about the Bermuda Triangle that the legend never quite gets around to telling. That most crossings are safe, that most passages are uneventful, that the sea, for all its ancient capacity for violence and mystery, receives the great majority of those who trust themselves to it and carries them gently to the other side. The ones who didn't make it, the sailors of the Cyclops, the airmen of Flight 19, the passengers of the Star Tiger, the men of the Witchcraft. They are the exception, a tragic, genuinely puzzling exception, but an exception nonetheless. We remember them tonight. We hold their stories carefully.
We do not pretend to know what happened to them, because we don't. But we honor their memory with the most honest thing we can offer, the acknowledgement that they were real, that their disappearances were real, and that the question of what became of them remains real and open, and worthy of the quiet hours we have spent with it tonight. That mystery belongs to them. It always will. The water is very deep. The sky is very wide. And out there, somewhere in the warm Atlantic dark, the triangle floats on without an answer.
Maybe the not knowing is its own kind of gift, the reminder that the world still has corners we haven't illuminated, depths we haven't sounded, questions the universe hasn't seen fit to answer yet. And in the long, slow drift towards sleep, in the gentle surrender of the waking mind, that not knowing doesn't have to feel like fear. It can feel like wonder, like the particular peace that comes from sitting with something much larger than yourself and letting it simply be what it is. Large, quiet, old, and full of secrets it has decided to keep. If tonight's slow journey through the deep waters of the Bermuda Triangle has carried you even a little way towards sleep, I'd love for you to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. We are working toward our first 1,000 subscribers here at Heyo, Boring History for Sleep, and every single subscription genuinely moves the needle. If you have a comment to leave, tell us where you are listening from, what the time is where you are, and if there is a topic you'd like us to drift through together on some future night. Your presence here means something. Every one of you settling in, closing your eyes, letting history and mystery watch gently over you, you are exactly why this channel exists. Sleep well tonight. The sea is calm, the triangle is quiet, and the world, for now, is exactly as peaceful as it needs to be. Good night.